It was a peculiar night in our somewhat large and old town, filled with 18th century buildings that echoed tales of the past. My friend Ryan and I, feeling the boredom gnawing at us, decided to venture out for some late-night fun. The clock struck 2 a.m., a time not known for its wisdom, but our desire for adventure outweighed any concerns. After cruising around and blasting our loud rock music, a common pastime for us as members of our own bands, we found ourselves drawn to the town cemetery behind the old town square, encompassing a vast 20 acres of land. The cemetery beckoned us to explore its historic depths. Opting for the older section, separated from the newer graves by a rusty iron fence and gate, we embarked on a journey into the past. Moss-covered gravestones surrounded us as we snapped pictures, perhaps being a bit disrespectful, considering these resting places dated back over a century. Yet, with no living souls to object, we proceeded without guilt. As we wandered past the 10th or 15th grave, Ryan suddenly halted, signaling me to wait. In the dim light, a figure near one of the gravestones caught our attention. Uncertain of our next move, we stood frozen, suspecting we had been caught by a graveyard caretaker. The man, a few feet away, asked sternly, "What are you two doing here?" Ryan nervously explained our exploration, expecting a reprimand. Instead, the man, wearing tattered clothes more fitting for a homeless person than a graveyard keeper, instructed us to follow him. Unease settled in as we trailed behind him. When he passed under a street lamp, the shock paralyzed us. His crazed eyes betrayed a sinister intent that went beyond a simple caretaker. In a fit of fear, we sprinted, leaping over the fence, the man's frustrated punches against the wooden barrier echoing behind us. Choosing to keep this unsettling encounter to ourselves, we never spoke of it except to a few trusted friends. Breaking the law in our late-night escapade was one thing, but encountering a menacing figure in the cemetery had us convinced to steer clear of that haunting place forever. Back in my teenage years, my buddies and I were always on the lookout for some excitement, often involving late-night escapades. One night, my friends Alex and Jake proposed the idea of sneaking into the local cemetery for a thrilling adventure. Intrigued, I agreed to join them on this nocturnal exploration. After ensuring our parents were sound asleep, we ventured out a little after midnight. The moon illuminated the dark night, granting us enough visibility to navigate through the cemetery gates. As we strolled through the graveyard, reading names on moss-covered gravestones, we joked about encountering ghosts and spirits. Our laughter turned to hushed whispers when we heard strange noises emanating from one of the mausoleums. Initially, I chalked it up to my imagination running wild in the late hour, but the sounds grew louder, resembling a group of people engaged in prayer. The mausoleum, labeled Anderson, stood as an imposing structure from a bygone era. Suddenly, a rustle in the darkness behind us caught our attention. I strained my eyes, but dismissed it as a mere animal. While fear began to creep in, Alex and Jake, seemingly unfazed, teased me about the late-night prayers. Pressed by a dare, I agreed to enter the Anderson mausoleum and pay my respects to the departed. As I approached, a strange calm enveloped me, and the murmuring inside became oddly soothing, akin to ASMR. It sounded as if they were whispering my name. Entranced, I entered the mausoleum and beheld an elderly couple, their backs turned to me. With long white hair and swaying in unison, they seemed lost in prayer. However, as the man turned toward me, my sense of calm shattered. His skeletal face, devoid of flesh, wore a lipless grin, and his eyes, held by cracked eyelids, stared into my soul. A sudden realization jolted through me. Something was horribly wrong. Panic surged as he grabbed my wrist, and the transformation began. My wrist withered as his skeletal fingers regained life, while my own hand decayed rapidly. In a desperate struggle, I gripped his arm, breaking brittle bones inside his suit sleeve. The man's dry scream echoed as he reached for my neck, scratching my soft skin. With a final yank, I broke free, stumbling out of the mausoleum. As Alex and Jake, initially skeptical, witnessed the ghastly figure beside me, they too joined in screaming and running. I discarded the severed hand in the mad dash back home, escaping with my life, but bearing scars on my wrist and neck. Swearing off visits to the cemetery, I vowed never to underestimate the supernatural, especially on a cold, windy night in November. It was a chilly evening in 2013, and I found myself at the crematorium, a place where the line between the living and the departed seemed to blur. The memory of a peculiar incident still sends shivers down my spine. After a somber service for a man of considerable weight, around 380 olds, my wife and I decided to make the cremation process more bearable by watching a movie. As the cremation chamber heated up, I carefully maneuvered the man's body onto a platform and slid him inside, closing the chamber door. Sitting down, we expected a routine process. About 5 minutes after sealing the chamber, an eerie thumping sound echoed through the room. At first, we dismissed it, attributing it to the usual sounds of the cremation process. However, the thumping persisted, growing more frantic with each passing second. Concerned, I couldn't help but wonder if the deceased had a pacemaker, even though his organs had been removed. Curiosity overcoming us, we peered through the front window of the chamber, and our eyes widened in disbelief. The man inside was not resting peacefully. Instead, he thrashed around wildly. His clenched fists pounded against the windows, and his legs kicked as if he were desperately trying to escape some unseen torment. While some movement during cremation was expected, this was different. The man's screams and frantic gestures were beyond the ordinary twitching caused by muscle contractions. We stood frozen, watching the impossible unfold before our eyes. The violent movements continued for about 20 seconds, until suddenly everything ceased. There was no sound, no movement, just the eerie silence of a man turned to ashes. My wife and I exchanged bewildered glances, unsure of how to process what we had witnessed. Should we alert the authorities? How could we explain a seemingly resurrected man inside the cremation chamber? In the end, we chose to keep the bizarre occurrence a secret, a haunting memory etched into our minds forever.